So we have some breaking news that Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi may well be warming up to the idea of Bernie Sanders being the Democratic nominee for president. Earlier today in Washington, she was asked about that possibility because Bernie Sanders is the undisputed frontrunner for the Democratic nomination. And she was asked, does this make you uncomfortable? And she said, no, I'm comfortable with Bernie being the nominee. And she also said that she wasn't worried about Bernie Sanders costing the Democrats significant losses in the House that would make it impossible for them to pass legislation. And this is a crucial development for so many reasons. Pelosi is one of the top-ranked, most respected corporate Democrats. The corporate wing of the party loves Nancy Pelosi. She is a longtime member of the party elite. And for her to say this will give a lot of people an excuse to also start saying good things about Bernie Sanders, or even just saying neutral things about Bernie Sanders. Pelosi is a leader, and many of the neoliberal Democrats will follow her. It's also really important because it shows Pelosi shifting away from her tone around Bernie and other progressive Democrats over the previous year and more. For a long time, Nancy Pelosi has been saying that Bernie Sanders, AOC, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar are great people. She likes them, but their vision doesn't have broad appeal. That it can win blue districts in blue states, but it can't appeal in the Midwest, even though Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib are not from, coastal states, even though they're not from particularly blue states. The narrative was that these sorts of policies are for the narrow liberal bubble, and they're not for average middle America. And that socialism, as Bernie Sanders and the other progressives are selling it, can't be a winner at the congressional level. And so Pelosi would say, look, the presidency is one thing, but the House is another. Don't forget the House. Implying that Bernie Sanders, if he was to be the nominee, if a left-wing person was to be the nominee and run on a left-wing platform, that they would hurt Nancy Pelosi and the House in 2020 and beyond. She's not saying that anymore. Indicating that maybe she's seen just how passionate Bernie Sanders' movement has been. That the young progressive congresswomen and congressmen that back Bernie Sanders are getting a lot of good stuff done and are very popular, very good at fundraising, very good at building energy and volunteer movements and organizations. Maybe she's coming around a little bit on the idea that a strong left-wing basis for the Democratic Party may not work in every single district all over the country, but can still build a majority of support in the Congress that can help the Democrats control the legislative agenda after 2020. We don't know what fully motivates Nancy Pelosi here. It's perfectly reasonable to suggest that some of this might be driven by the fact that Shahid Buttar is challenging Nancy Pelosi for the Democratic nomination in her congressional district. He's a left-wing challenger, younger, dynamic, passionate, has a lot of grassroots energy behind him, and he's pushing Pelosi hard, consistently from the left. And Pelosi might feel that by saying this about Bernie Sanders, by nodding that she would be comfortable with Bernie, this might get some of the people that are challenging her to lay off just a little bit. Maybe she worries about the left-wing challenge she faces in the congressional primary that's going to be happening soon in California. And so maybe this is cynical. Maybe Pelosi doesn't believe a word of what she's saying. She still doesn't want to see Bernie Sanders win. She still thinks that he won't do a good job. She still thinks that he's going to cost them the Congress, but until she secures her nomination, maybe she's going to play nice or pretend to play nice with Bernie. But it could also be the case, guys, that Pelosi sees the way the party is moving. Pelosi has had a very long political career. She's been Speaker of the House or been the leading Democrat in the House for more than a decade now, easily more than a decade now. And so Nancy Pelosi understands that part of her job, part of her ability to survive, is to understand where the winds are blowing and how to meet those wins. And she sees the same data we're seeing, guys, that Bernie Sanders has the highest favorability rating among Democrats, that Bernie Sanders has the biggest potential pool of voters, that Bernie Sanders is very popular with independents, that Bernie Sanders is the only Democrat, according to a recent Associated Press poll, that has a higher national favorability rating among Republicans, Democrats, and independents than Trump. Everyone else has a lower favorability rating than Trump. Bernie Sanders has what it takes, has the movement, has the money, has the energy, has the ideas, has the polling behind him to defeat Donald Trump in a way that no one else quite does. I'm not necessarily saying that nobody else has any chance at all to defeat Donald Trump. I would never make such a bold prediction this far out. But I think what a lot of people are realizing is it's Bernie who's building the movement. Bernie's increasing his scope in terms of diversity, in terms of the national breadth of his strength. He's more competitive in states 4 years ago that he got, frankly, shellacked by Hillary Clinton. And he's competitive in many of those states now. So Nancy Pelosi, maybe because she's cynical and she's worried about her own seat, but maybe because she also sees where the Democratic Party base is moving, knows that Bernie Sanders may be tapping into something that she didn't feel existed or she didn't feel was accessible at this point in time. So I think it's important that we take these moments with a clear eye. Let's not all of a sudden go all in on Nancy Pelosi and say that she's great and say that she's part of the squad and basically give up on the fact that Shahid Buttar is still a better version of Nancy Pelosi and she should be replaced by him. I'm not saying any of that, but it is to acknowledge that many people, not everyone, but many people within the Democratic Party base, some people within traditional liberal media spaces are starting to acknowledge that Bernie Sanders is accomplishing something. And they're either becoming more friendly to Bernie or less antagonistic to Bernie. And I think when people do that, we have to welcome that move. We don't always have to agree with them. If they were wrong before and they're still wrong, we should still critique them. But we should welcome these moments because it's not every day that Nancy Pelosi basically gives Bernie Sanders the seal of approval, the stamp of approval. She's not endorsing him, but what effectively she's saying is, I would be content with Bernie Sanders being the nominee. That's not something Nancy Pelosi likely would have said even a few weeks ago, let alone a few months ago. So let's celebrate this moment. Let's take it as recognition that Bernie Sanders is transforming the Democratic Party, and let's keep pushing forward so that Bernie Sanders is the one to unify everyone in this party to take on Donald Trump and build a strong Democratic majority in 2020.